This is the Impact Report. I'm your host, Katie Ellman. The Impact Report brings together students and faculty in Bard College's MBA in Sustainability program with leaders in business, sustainability, finance, social entrepreneurship, and more. These conversations go live the first and third Friday of each month. Happy Earth Day! This week, Bard MBA's Hannah Hintz speaks with Viral Hardev, Vice President of Strategy at Ubiquitous Energy.
Thank you, Katie. Really excited to be here to interview you, Viral Hardev, as the VP of Strategy at Ubiquitous Energy. My name's Hannah Hintz, and I am a Bard MBA candidate. I'm really excited in the program to make an impact, and particularly interested in interviewing you today because I think the energy transition is such an important part of what we need to tackle. Also, I understand and have seen a bit of your product in an office building near me here in Boulder, Colorado.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Hannah, and thank you for having me. Yeah, super excited to be here today to chat with you.
Great. Well, I will kick us off with a little bit of introduction and then dive in. Ubiquitous Energy was founded in 2011 to find new ways to reduce humanity's carbon footprint by seamlessly integrating solar power technology into everyday products and services. They are leading the world in transparent solar technologies for both residential and commercial buildings in the form of solar windows. I would love if you can tell us a little bit more about the technology that you used and the founding of the company and concept.
Maybe I'll start with the story of the founding, and then I think it'll make a little more sense. So yeah, kind of as you read off there a little bit about our background, our context, it's really just around how do we increase our adoption and deploy more renewable energy technology in general. Right. And so when our founders were at MIT researching ways, specifically in renewable energy and solar, to do things that were pretty common, I would say 10 to 15 years ago, and probably still today, in terms of how do we make traditional solar technology more deployable? How do we make it cheaper? How do we make it more efficient? How do we make it flexible? And while they were kind of, researching all of those things, they kind of came upon this concept of, well, hey, instead of doing all of these things, what if we tried to make it such that it just looks better? Because the one thing that, with traditional solar technology and solar panels in general, is that a lot of people don't like the way it looks, right? It's kind of really dark, it's really black or blue or opaque. And the thought that they had was, what if we could actually make a solar device or solar technology that didn't appear that way? What if we could make it invisible? What if we could make it transparent? And if you could do that, then it's like, oh my gosh, then you can apply this technology to all these places all around us where you typically can't. And so they came across this concept of what technically we call selective absorption. And so what that really means is, the way that solar technology generally works is, from a high level, you get energy from sunlight, and then you convert some of that light energy into useful electricity. And so the better you are, or the technology is, in converting that energy, the more efficient it is, right? And so historically, materials like silicon have been so widely researched and historically worked on because of its fundamental property that it absorbs a pretty wide amount of light energy from sun. However, the challenge that we saw, or that our founders saw, was that it also absorbs the visible light energy, meaning that you can't really change the properties optically or visually of that technology. And the thought was, well, what if you could? What if you could actually change the properties of that material so that it looks transparent? So it doesn't absorb the visible light, still absorbs all of this other light energy that comes from sunlight that we can't see with our human eye, but is still going to be electrically functioning. And so again, they call that selective absorption. And so really the concept behind the technology is it's a solar technology that works just like any other solar technology. The trick is that we don't absorb that visible light energy. And that's how we can create a technology that's transparent to our human eye, but still electrically functioning because it's absorbing all that non-visible light energy and converting that into useful electricity.
Super interesting. Thank you for running through that transformation of transparency, if you will.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to have you describe a little bit more about the end product. Where would we see this? What does it look like? How is it implemented?
Sure. There's a number of places, I think kind of as you read off in our background where we think this could be applied, right? So we think that any surface literally that sees sunlight or is exposed to sunlight is a surface that's ripe for opportunity to become an actively functioning renewable energy generating surface. And so with our technology, we believe that's possible. Now, to give you a few concrete examples, when we kind of look around the world, we really see a challenge in terms of where do we need the most power, and where is that challenge to kind of provide that power where it's needed the most. And so when you think about that, you quickly look to urban environments and downtown areas where you have a high concentration of population, you have large structures or buildings or apartment buildings and so on and so forth, but you don't have a lot of real estate, a lot of space to put in other types of renewable energy technologies. Like you can't put on a wind farm in the middle of downtown Denver, right, where you are, or in the middle of Manhattan, where Bards is from, right? So the thinking there is then, how can you integrate renewable energy technologies into these kind of places, right? Kind of where you need the power the most, how can we kind of satisfy that need? And so for us, one of the concrete examples is windows, right? All buildings generally have windows. People want more and more windows. And so the thinking here is, what if you could turn your windows into windows that are also solar panels without affecting the way they look? So they still look like a traditional window. They're nice to look at. They're aesthetically pleasing. They're highly transparent. You don't really even know that you're looking through a window that's actually generating electricity. That's an invisible solar panel. That's our ideal goal. And so if we can do that, and that's kind of what we're working on as our first product and coming to the market in a couple of years, then we can really start to convert buildings, residential homes, into these structures that are going to be more energy efficient, and they're going to have renewable energy generation on site without really impacting too much else, right? We're not asking for additional real estate of the building, or asking that you make a compromise aesthetically or visually because it has that. There's really no trade-off that we really see. And so that's what gets us really excited. And when we think globally from the impact perspective, it can be pretty significant, right? Imagine all new construction that's happening around the world. If it was, instead of using traditional windows, if it was using windows embedded with our technology, we could have a really significant impact. And that's what gets us really excited. A couple of maybe stats that I'll throw your way is that I think over the next 30 years or so, the building stock that we have, the number of homes and buildings globally is going to double, right? And so we really need to address these buildings and make them more energy efficient. You might have heard of things like net zero energy buildings or positive energy producing buildings. We really believe with technology like ours, that's possible. And then the other thing is, some analysis we've done has shown that if we're successful and can, broadly deploy this technology globally, we could offset up to 10% of our global carbon emissions, which is pretty significant. And we think of our solution as a solution to help fight climate change and be a resource in our renewable energy kind of toolkit, if you will. But it's not going to be the only solution. We're not naive about that. We need a lot of things working together, and that's really what's behind a lot of our philosophy and our mindset, is that we want to work complementary with other technologies and systems as much as we can. And the reason I bring that up is that we don't see ourselves as a competitive or a competition to traditional solar. We really see it as complementary. Where you can put traditional technologies where it's aesthetically okay, or if it's on the roof or in a farm or in a field somewhere, that's great. But if you have windows, use our technology and they can work kind of seamlessly together.
I appreciate that segue, and I want to take a moment to really call out what you highlighted is with the integration of your technology, a 10% reduction in emissions. I think that can be really powerful. So to bring it back down a little bit to the personal level, as you had just mentioned, it being a complementary product. I have solar on my house. I'm lucky enough to have a roof that's angled in the right way to generate enough solar to power the home. But looking forward, as more of us get hopefully electric vehicles and need a little bit more power or live in an area where that placement isn't quite as ideal, can you speak a little bit about comparisons with your product and typical solar? What's the output per square foot, or how does it compare to the typical solar panel? And is that orientation important, or is it simply a transparent surface that you're looking for?
Yeah, great question, Hannah. A lot to unpack there, so I'll kind of step through it if you bear with me. So at first, kind of how do we compare with traditional solar technologies? I think the best way to compare it is really just in terms of efficiency. So, your traditional solar technology that's on your roof, offered by companies like SunPower, First Solar, Tesla, whoever, Solar City, typically are going to range in this 15 to 20% efficiency. Some others have some offerings that are a little bit higher, 22% or so. And so that's kind of we call the baseline, right? Of course, there's other advanced things that are a little bit more exotic, stuff like aerospace and stuff like that, which is much higher performance. It's not really a commercial product, right? So when we look at that from a commercial standpoint, our technology, we've proven and certified performance as high as 10% power conversion efficiency. So, not quite the same as what you get from traditional solar technologies. But again, we're making this conscious trade-off, if you will, about making it transparent. And by doing so, we are not capturing and harnessing about a third of that power potential that comes from sunlight to convert to use electricity like traditional solar panels do. So we're today roughly about half. There's theoretical limits and practical limits that are going to be higher than that. But even at that level of performance and lower, there's a lot of application and a lot of value, we believe, technologies like ours kind of offered right to the window. And there's kind of two things, and we think about it in two different ways. One is really, now that you have a window that has a renewable energy generation surface right out the window, you can do some pretty innovative things. Historically, windows are passive. They don't really have electrification. You can't really do anything other than add on other things like window coverings and mechanical things like that. So now, as we're advancing, not only from a building and home side, and I'm sure you've heard of things like smart buildings, smart homes, and all these advances of different disparate devices that are internet connected, remotely, wirelessly communicating with each other. Take your Ring doorbell, your Nest thermostat. These are all kind of smart home devices, right? So we really see our technology is now converting the window into a smart home device. And what we can do with that is we can power a number of different electrical features right at the window. So we can power things like sensors, other features like security detection, motion detection, security cameras, right at the window. And so that's really interesting because it offers a lot of value, we believe, in terms of just extending what the capability of these other devices are. And then again, able to kind of connect remotely or wirelessly with all these other systems. So there's a lot of value, we believe, in terms of kind of seamless integration, convenience for the occupant, whether it's the homeowner, or the building, or the tenant. And then the second thing really is just an extension of how much energy generation can you get. More is generally better, right? As we're advancing, there's more devices, there's more things we're communicating with and plugging in. And so there, especially as we kind of think of larger scale, right? Not only from a residential home or apartment building, but when you start thinking about bigger commercial buildings, even as big as skyscrapers, there's a lot of surface area on these buildings. And if we can use our technology, we're just gonna have such an absolute higher amount of energy that's produced, renewable energy on site, that helps to offset the building's energy consumption. And that can be done in a number of ways. You could offset different systems' energy consumption, things like offsetting energy needed to power all the lights. You could offset the energy that's needed to run the heating and ventilation air conditioning system, the HVAC system. And or you could, like traditional solar, connect it back to the grid, net meter it, right? The building could be producing so much energy that it could sell some of that energy back to the grid. It could sell it if it's almost like a community microgrid type of a infrastructure. It could sell it back to its neighbors or things like this. And what we really think in both cases, what this really helps with also as a kind of an inherent benefit is the resiliency. As we're kind of going and advancing as a society, one thing that is happening quite frequently is these natural events, especially here in California. We actually have something that's called a wildfire season now. That never existed when I was a kid. Even 10 years ago, that didn't exist. And so what that really means is it's putting a lot more strain on our electrical grid. And our electrical grid, not to go down a rabbit hole here, has been based on fossil fuel technologies, right? Coal and gas and oil. And not that we're going to be able to completely overhaul and change the infrastructure of the electrical grid, but we need to make it smarter and advance to the kind of current generation, which is being able to adopt more renewable energy technologies and fitting that in. And so just making that whole electrical grid more resilient so that in events where you do have natural disasters, wildfires, or severe weather events, if the grid goes down, what happens, right? And so making structures and buildings and all of these different things more resilient, we believe is also a really valuable thing going forward.
The Impact Report is brought to you by the BARD Graduate Programs in Sustainability, offering both hybrid and in-person degrees in environmental policy, climate science and policy, environmental education, and sustainable business. BARD offers scholarships for all applicants who qualify and enrolls new cohorts each fall. Learn how to apply at gps.bard.edu.
What else do you think we need to do as a global entity to transform the energy sector? What are our keys to success?
Yeah, really great question, Hannah. And there's a number of things are flowing through my head. One thing that we see a lot, and then maybe this is a little biased from our perspective, is really just broad education and awareness. I think the average person out there is just not aware that technologies like ours and others exist, and if they're deployed and adopted, what kind of really positive impact could that have? I think there's a lot of good stuff happening out in the world in terms of other advancements in technology and energy, kind of efficiency in general. And I think what we've seen is most of the conversation has been, how do we save energy? How do we consume less energy? How do we make things more energy efficient? And nobody's really looking, we believe, as much as we should be, at the other side of the equation. How do we create more renewable energy? Because as we're growing, as a society, population is increasing, as I mentioned, and more devices, more energy consumption, we think it's difficult. It's a difficult path to ask people to really just start consuming less. In a capitalistic society and developing countries around the world, they're going to be consuming more and more energy. And so how do we actually increase the amount of energy that's available, that's sustainable, that's renewable, that's clean, that's really going to meet our needs? And so, it's not just more traditional solar deployment. It's not just more traditional wind energy deployment. It's really taking all of these things and kind of making them work together. And that's where I personally really see this kind of all going, hopefully eventually, and makes it really exciting. So, kind of think of an analogy right now, and I've heard this a lot, is especially in this kind of smart home world, where you might have a Google, Google Home thing, you might have an Alexa thing, you might have an Apple Home thing, you might have a Nest, thermostat, all of these disparate devices. And it's very frustrating and confusing to consumers. How do all these things work together? Well, they really don't work together. So how can we actually make them all work together? And I think what the industry in that particular field has done is they've started creating an alliance and said, hey, look, all of these things should be able to communicate together. And so that, I believe it's called Matter, that's formed. And so we definitely are going to need and see something like that happening. That's connecting grids, smart grids, energy storage, energy generation, all of these things, they got to kind of work really together and seamlessly and convenient in order for all of these things to get adopted as quickly as we need to get them adopted, because we have a huge challenge ahead of us as a global society. But I always say when the times get really tough and it looks pretty bleak, we're pretty resilient as a society. You use the pandemic as a really good example. Things were getting shut down and all this stuff happened. People weren't going into the office, a lot of remote stuff happening. But when you kind of look back, to some degree, people were still really effective, really efficient, of course, depending on the industry you're in. And so when you're up against it, which we're definitely up against it as a global society in terms of climate change and all these kind of things, there's going to be solutions, and it's going to get done, and it's going to get solved. And we really think it starts, going back to my earlier comments, is around just awareness. Like, these things exist, they can work together, and let's just make it happen.
I love that theme of resiliency being pulled through. And we here at BARD, of course, are looking at those more holistic approaches to make systemic change. So I think we have a good sense. You've mentioned that Ubiquitous is a complementary product. It needs to work with many other of the solutions that we have at hand. Do you have any competitors?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we have competitors. You could think of any window technology as a competitive technology to us, if I specifically look at that application. In terms of our core technology, transparent solar technology, we don't really believe there are competitors that have an offering that we have. And what I mean by that is really it's this combination of a few things. It's really the combination of really good high transparency. So you could make a window that looks like a traditional window, but the transparency is just not enough. You got to make it also visually aesthetically appealing, meaning that the color, there's no color, right? Like, you shouldn't be able to see nobody wants to look out a window that's brightly colored, yellow or green or blue. There might be some place in the market for that, but in terms of broad deployment and broad application, which is kind of what we're after, that's not the case. And then the third thing is the kind of combination of the other side of the performance. How efficient is it? Will it last a long time? Windows generally last a long time. So our technology is not one that's going to be replaced every year or every few months or every few years. It's got to last just as long as the window. So when we look at all those things together, we really believe our technology stands out from our competition. And on the competition side, there are other, I would say, solutions to try to integrate solar into applications like Windows, but they all have some trade-off. Either they're very, dark colored, they're very tinted, they're not as efficient. And then there's probably another set of companies or early academic type technologies that are trying to integrate into Windows using kind of a similar approach as we are, using slightly different technologies and processes, but again, they have some trade-off, either in cost or ability to be manufactured. And so there's a couple of companies that are on the market that I would refer as kind of competitors, but again, they have some disadvantage, and they're mostly actually from Europe, not surprisingly, where a lot of more advanced solar technology kind of work has occurred, and it's been driven really more, we believe, by the government and the kind of push from the society there in general, just to be more energy efficient. It's starting to catch on, of course, here more in the U.S. And especially North America and Canada, quite a bit. But there's not really somebody we really are saying like, oh man, we really got to beat Tesla, or there's no really a well-established player here. And at the same time, we're not naive. This is a pretty big opportunity. There's over 20 billion square feet of glass that's installed in windows around the world every year. And it's naive of us as a small company to think that we're going to be able to supply all of that. And so we believe we're going to be one of the leading players and hopefully one of the first players, but we're not going to be the only ones. I think that would be pretty naive of us to believe that.
Yeah, as you spoke to earlier, we certainly hope that that education and adoption expands, however that needs to play out. I do want to ask you a little bit about yourself and more specifically about the company. As a candidate for the MBA program here at Bard, I'm here to create my path to make change. So I would love to know, as the VP of Strategy at Ubiquitous Energy, a little bit more about your professional background, what prepared you for this role, and what you see as next steps with the company forward.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to share. It's interesting when I think back to, so I got my MBA about 8 years ago. It seems like decades ago, but it was not that long ago. And my journey has been, so I have an engineering background, I was just a technology kind of person. And so I went to school, got a double major in material science and economics, and was really just infatuated with kind of high technology. And so I did that for, I would say, for the first part of my career, working in more of an engineering technical role. And I always had this notion of, hey, I wanted to do something more that's more outside of engineering and more, I would say, kind of business related. So, working with other folks, working with, management, potentially customers, partnerships. And that's what really drove me to get my MBA. And since I've had my MBA, that's kind of what I did. I called it kind of a natural progression or transition from engineering in terms to kind of business development, marketing, working with partnerships and customers, and trying to help figure out, when we have technologies like we have, how do we actually commercialize this? How do we actually get this into the market? And so that's what I find really fun and really fascinating, and I enjoy quite a bit. And so that kind of brought me to Ubiquitous Energy, where I saw this technology and I said, wow, this is so fascinating. I didn't think this was even possible. About 6 years ago is when I joined, and I love it. I really believe in the technology. I really believe in the mission of trying to make things more, energy efficient, more sustainable, clean energy. And so it was a great fit for me, and it's been thus far. And in terms of next steps, for me, it's really just helping get our technology right over that commercialization hump. And so we're really right on that precipice, and that's what's really exciting. We're going to be building a manufacturing line to produce window units embedded with our technology, and that'll be coming in a couple of years. So it's really, really exciting. It seems like a long time, but with technologies like this, they don't happen overnight. Hard tech, material science technologies take usually several years to decades to actually make it in the commercial market. And so it's really exciting to be where we're at. And that's what's I find even more kind of invigorating and passionate about actually being at a company that is doing something that hopefully is going to make a change positively, in terms of just kind of what we need, and just having fun while we do it. I think as a small company, the steps for us are pretty big ahead of us. We're going to grow quite a bit. And so for us, it's really exciting, but at the same time, it's one of those things where we don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much. And that's where a lot of focus comes into play, as a small company, and where I believe I can help in terms of, hey, instead of doing all of these things ourselves, we can work with the industry, we can work with partners to help us in this journey, because we're not going to be the company that has all the solutions, has all the things, has all the answers. And so we want to work with partners as much as we can. There's just no need for us to kind of reinvent the wheel, if you will, right? Recreate the wheel to do things that are already being done and already being done efficiently, where we can add our expertise, help enable others to do even better. That's really what gets me excited.
Great. So described how the evolution of technology takes some time. So does funding typically, but Ubiquitous Energy completed Series B funding of $30 million late last year in 2021. And I believe that brings your total funds raised to 70 million. So curious how this part of the business has changed over the 10 years that the company's been in existence. Do you think funders are more interested in this product and technology as it evolves, or based on our current environmental concerns than they were a decade ago?
Really, really great question, Hannah. The really short answer is completely 100% yes. I would say maybe 10 years ago or so, even when I wasn't at Ubiquitous Energy and kind of in the renewable energy generation kind of industry at all, people were starting to talk about things like this from an investment standpoint. And I think there was a lot of talk and not a lot of action. And what we've seen over the last, gosh, pick your time frame, even 2-3 years, even right before the pandemic hit. But I think since the pandemic hit, it's actually accelerated quite a bit. A lot more conversation, a lot more action. And so the Series B that we raised, to give a really good example, one of the investors that came in is a company called Enios, and they're one of Japan's largest oil and gas companies. And so you might say, well, why is an oil and gas company investing in a startup company that's doing transparent solar? Well, they have a really big corporate mission to be completely off fossil fuel technology by the year 2040. So this is a company that's probably the same size as somebody like a Shell or a BP, a really multinational billion-dollar global company, probably the 6th or 7th largest corporation in Japan, who is saying, hey, in less than 20 years, our whole business is going to be 100% completely different than what we're doing. And they are putting their money where their mouth is, right? And so I don't think we saw that even a few years ago. And so that's really positive, I see, because a lot more money and investment that happens for tech companies like ours, climate solutions, clean energy generation, sustainable technologies, is what we need, right, in order to meet our goals. And so again, back to awareness brings more attention, brings more funding, so more things can happen more quickly. I think in general, that's what's really exciting from an investor standpoint. And yes, that is 100% is what changed, I would say, from a sentiment in that market.
Great. Well, on that positive note of positive change, I would leave it to you to share any final thoughts, either about the industry, your work, or your time at Ubiquitous Energy.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. The one thing that I would leave you with is kind of a stat that I still to this day find really mind-boggling, and I think this is kind of awareness, and I think it's hard to really for people to grasp, because the numbers, when you start talking about billions and large numbers, it's just hard to grasp. I think this is pretty simple to grasp. Solar technology in general itself can meet all of our needs, right? Meet all of our global society needs, hundreds of times over. The stat is at any given time, there's about 1,000 times more energy coming from sunlight than we need as a global society to fully sustain ourselves. And so when you think about that, it's like, that's really, really fascinating, right? So we don't need to deploy solar and cover the world. It's really just a small portion of the global footprint. But again, when we expand it to cover other surfaces with technologies like ours, all of this is going to be actually possible. And so that's what's really exciting. I just find that stat so amazing that think about it, enough energy is hitting the surface of the earth every minute. That's 1,000 times more than we actually need as a global society. And that's just really fascinating.
The power of the sun. Very,
exactly.
Very impactful. Well,
That's
for
right.
all of us excited about your journey, how can listeners learn more and be in touch with Ubiquitous Energy, maybe even obtaining some windows for their own home in the future?
Yeah, definitely. We're not quite on the market yet, but hopefully in a couple of years that will be different. Um, the best place to go to is just to our website, and that's ubiquitous.energy. Ubiquitous is kind of a hard word for most people to spell, but it's Ubiquitous, just .energy. Go to our website. You can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all of the main kind of social media platforms. We do a pretty good job in terms of our outreach, in terms of media, and doing things like this, right? Having interviews with the media, whether it's podcasts or whether it's TV segments or radio segments. We're again just trying to bring more awareness, and so the best place to go is ubiquitous.energy, and then from there you should be able to kind of navigate around, kind of see what we're up to, check out some of our technology, see some videos, learn a little bit more, and then just see what we're up to in general.
Thank you. Well, there you have it. We can follow Ubiquitous Energy and you, Viral Hardev, on your journey forward and harnessing the power of the sun and all the opportunity it brings to us. I so appreciate the time today. I've certainly learned a lot. It's been interesting and energizing.
Yeah, no, thank you for your time, Hannah, as well. And I'm always happy to kind of chat about what we're doing and about myself. And it's great to be with you on a podcast that's really focused on sustainability and that whole field, because it's going to be really important for us going forward. So thank you again for your time.
We appreciate our loyal Impact Report listeners and hope you can help us spread the word about the series and the important sustainability work of our guests. Please rate and review the Impact Report wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you were inspired by this conversation, share a screenshot on Instagram and tag Impact Report Podcast. To learn more about the topics discussed in today's episode, please visit ubiquitous.energy. And be sure to head to greenbiz.com or impactentrepreneur.com to read a recap of our conversation. Join us for the next episode of the Impact Report on Friday, April 29th. We'll be speaking with Molly Brown, Chief Science Officer of 6th Grain. Interested in learning how you can launch a high-impact, purpose-driven career in sustainability? Check out the resources page from the Bard Graduate Programs in Sustainability for access to free resources to jumpstart your career. Hear from leaders in the fields of climate change, consulting, impact finance, circular economy, and more about how they launched their careers and the tips they have for you to join their industries. Visit gps.bard.edu/resources today.